On July 22, 1958, a beach travel air climbed away from Little Rock, Arkansas, carrying 4 people on an FAA multi-engine check ride. Moments later, at barely 500 feet, the aircraft entered a flat spin. All 4 aboard died, including 3 of aviation writer Richard Collins's close friends. That accident should have been a wake-up call. Instead, it became a template for tragedy. Dozens of identical crashes followed in Travel Air's Barons and twin Comanches. The FAA was essentially issuing multi-engine ratings to the survivors. But here's the part that defies all logic. Despite decades of data proving that Piston twins are statistically no safer than singles, and in many scenarios demonstrably more dangerous, pilots keep buying them. They pay insurance premiums 3 to 4 times higher than comparable singles. They accept aircraft that can lose 80% of their climb performance the instant one engine quits. They fly machines where a moment's hesitation after an engine failure can flip them inverted before they even understand what's happening. The twin-engine piston airplane is aviation's ultimate paradox. The promise of a second engine feels like the ultimate safety net. But the physics tell a different story entirely. This is why pilots still buy aircraft that, statistically speaking, are actively trying to kill them. In the years following World War II, a generation of bomber and transport pilots entered civilian aviation carrying an unshakable belief. More engines meant more safety, period. These men had flown B-17S and C-47S across oceans and combat zones. They'd watched engines fail and kept flying. To them, the mathematics seemed obvious. 2 engines were twice as safe as 1. The entire industry bought into this conviction. Flight schools, manufacturers, insurance companies, everyone agreed that any serious pilot would eventually step up to a twin. It wasn't just a goal. It was a rite of passage, a mark of achievement. The pilot who could afford 2 engines and chose to fly one was considered either foolish or cheap. But here's what nobody questioned. The insurance companies were so convinced of twin superiority that they charged less to insure them than singles. Think about that for a moment. When Richard Collins's father switched from a single-engine Comanche to a twin Comanche in 1964, the insurance premium actually dropped. The industry was betting billions on a myth that had never been tested. Then came the testing and the dying. The FAA had created a requirement that seemed reasonable on paper, but proved catastrophic in practice. To earn a multi-engine rating, pilots had to demonstrate minimum control speed handling as low as possible, but not below 500 feet. This meant flying at the ragged edge of controllability, barely above stall speed, with asymmetric thrust introduced suddenly. At just 500 feet above the ground, the accidents started immediately and never stopped. Travel Airs, Barons, twin Comanches. They spun out of the sky with sickening regularity. Flat spins from which recovery was impossible. By the late 1960s, fully 1/3 of fatal twin Comanche accidents occurred during training. 1/3, in just 5% of the total flying time. Richard Collins spent years begging FAA officials to change the deadly requirement. He was repeatedly rebuffed, sent away feeling like a private who had crossed swords with a colonel. The agency seemed more interested in certifying survivors than protecting students. And yet, the myth persisted. Pilots kept buying twins, kept paying for training, kept dying in preventable accidents. The insurance companies eventually noticed. Today, those same twins cost 3 to 4 times more to ensure than comparable singles. But the training deaths were just the beginning of this story. To understand why piston twins remain so dangerous requires understanding what actually happens when one engine quits. The physics are brutal. Most pilots assume that losing one engine means losing half their power and half their performance. The math seems simple. 2 engines, lose one, 50% reduction. This assumption is catastrophically wrong. Here's the shocking reality that changes everything. When a light twin loses an engine, it doesn't lose 50% of its climb performance. It loses up to 80%, sometimes more. A Piper Seneca at sea level with one engine failed climbs at just 190 feet per minute. Under certain conditions, that number approaches 0. Some twins loaded near gross weight on hot days simply cannot climb at all. But why? The answer lies in asymmetric thrust and the brutal physics of drag. When one engine quits, the other keeps producing full power. But that power is now several feet off the aircraft's centerline, creating a massive yawing force toward the dead engine. The pilot must counter this with aggressive rudder input. That deflected rudder creates drag. The windmilling propeller on the dead engine creates enormous drag. The slight bank required to maintain control creates drag. Every correction compounds the problem. And then there's the timeline. The pilot has seconds to execute a perfect sequence. Identify the failed engine, verify it, feather the propeller, maintain airspeed above minimum control speed, retract the landing gear, miss one step, hesitate once, and physics takes over completely. This is where pilots die. Below minimum control speed, the rudder can no longer counteract asymmetric thrust. The aircraft doesn't just turn toward the dead engine, it rolls, violently, inverted. At low altitude, this maneuver is universally fatal. Beech aircraft conducted spin testing on the Baron that revealed something terrifying. Out of 100 spins, the aircraft recovered from 98 using standard techniques. The 2 that required emergency parachutes to save the test crew. Both were VMC rollover entries. Once that roll begins, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Consider what this means in practice. A pilot experiences engine failure at 300 feet during climb. His instincts scream to pull back, maintain altitude, save the airplane. Those instincts will kill him. The correct response is counterintuitive. Push the nose down. Reduce power on the good engine if necessary. Sacrifice altitude to maintain airspeed and control. The physics of asymmetric flight are unforgiving, yet thousands of pilots accept these risks every year. The question becomes unavoidable. What could possibly justify flying these machines? Picture yourself 50 miles offshore, crossing Lake Michigan at night when your single engine begins running rough. Your options are grim. A cirrus parachute might save your life over a cornfield. Over dark, frigid water, it merely changes the angle of impact. This is where the twin-engine argument becomes genuinely compelling. For pilots who regularly cross large bodies of water, traverse Alaskan wilderness, or fly night IFR in serious weather, that second engine provides something no single can match. Options. Not guaranteed survival, but options. And it's not just propulsion redundancy. Twins offer dual alternators, dual vacuum pumps, dual hydraulic systems. Anyone who has shot an ILS approach to minimums when the nearest visual conditions are 2 states away understands the desperation of losing electrical power. In hard instrument conditions, systems redundancy isn't luxury, it's survival. But here's what the accident statistics don't capture. At Bradley International Airport, tower logs revealed that over 6 months, an average of 1 twin per month landed with an engine shut down. Half were airline turboprops with precautionary shutdowns. The rest were piston twins. Those pilots executed perfect emergency procedures, landed safely, and taxied to parking. No accident reports, no statistics, no recognition that the system worked exactly as designed. This hidden data reveals an uncomfortable truth. Piston twins can be flown safely. They simply demand more than most pilots are willing to give. Waldo Anderson has flown, instructed, and administered FAA check rides in Barons for decades. His assessment cuts through the noise. These are fantastic airplanes. The more you fly them, the better you understand them. They were way ahead of their time. The insurance industry now requires 25 to 50 hours of dual instruction before solo. Annual recurrent training has become standard. These requirements aren't punishment. They're acknowledgement that proficiency determines outcomes. Today, a 1979 Baron costs roughly the same to purchase as a 1979 Bonanza. Nearly identical acquisition price, but the Baron demands dramatically higher insurance premiums, doubled fuel consumption, and doubled maintenance costs. Pilots who accept these burdens aren't ignorant of the risks. They've calculated that certain missions justify the commitment. The statistics ultimately condemn neither the aircraft nor their pilots. They condemn complacency. Pilots who maintain rigorous currency make successful engine-out landings that never appear in any database. Those who let proficiency slip become cautionary tales. The piston twin isn't inherently deadly. It's simply unforgiving. Here's the truth that nobody wants to hear. Piston twins aren't death traps, and they aren't the safety blankets pilots once believed them to be. They're something far more complicated. Aircraft that demand more than most pilots are willing to give. The data is clear. Engine failures in twins are twice as likely to be fatal as in singles. Insurance companies now charge 3 to 4 times more for twins than comparable singles. The physics are unforgiving. Lose one engine and you've lost up to 80% of your ability to climb. But the data also shows this. Skilled, current pilots fly twins safely every day. They land with one engine caged, taxi to the ramp, and nobody ever knows. Those flights don't make accident statistics because they aren't accidents. The twins' promise can be fulfilled, but only by pilots who treat proficiency as non-negotiable. So why do pilots still buy these aircraft against all apparent logic? Because some missions genuinely demand that second engine. Because some pilots commit to the training these machines require. And because aviation has always attracted people willing to master complexity rather than avoid it. The piston twin isn't trying to kill you. It's just waiting to see if you've done the work. Subscribe, because we're just getting started exploring the aircraft that define aviation's razor edge.